Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about the impact of Windows 10 in the enterprise. You're all affected because you all have to adopt Windows 10, probably sooner than you think. So I'm going to try to convince you of a few things today. Let's get right into it. So my name's Troy, and I want you to know first, I've lived in your shoes. I've absolutely been this guy pulling his hair out. I've got about 17 years in enterprise IT. All of that focused almost entirely on systems management, OSD, imaging, software delivery, asset tracking, patching, those types of things. Our broad exposure to a large number of customers combined with our vendor and OEM relationships is why we think we have something relevant to share. So we want to thank you for joining, and we're going to try to share some key insights we think we have to help you avoid pitfalls, reduce your risk, and lower costs in relation to adopting Windows 10. But first, before we get into that, let's set the stage a little bit and talk about the past few decades of IT. The current era, we believe, is all about the end user, and we actually call these people productive users now. If you think about the things that your end users actually use in your business, it's Office, line of business applications, a number of emerging productivity applications, different cloud SaaS apps, Salesforce, Slack, all those things. It's an absolute explosion in types of devices that you're seeing in the enterprise, different form factors, new OSs, new apps every day. And the truth is we can't stop it. It's not going to stop it. And this is a trend that we believe will continue. And when we think about the challenges in these different areas, the needs of these productive users is currently outpacing the generation of tools that we have. And what I'm really going to talk about today is that I don't think you should be focused on the tools anyways. And let me explain what I mean by that. If we look at the challenges we see our customers and many of you currently facing, one, your on-premise tool, which is likely very mature in a systems management platform, is beginning to lose relevance, right? It can't manage some of the new form factors. It may not have a strong mobility or MDM component, may not be able to manage some of your cloud applications. So the tools or the platforms that you may have today are losing their relevance in the new world that we're facing around the productive user. At the same time, the new cloud-based tools that have emerged are still immature, and they can't really solve the workloads that we need to still run in many of our businesses. And so those two things have really led to a couple of conditions. One, the NPS or Net Promoter Scores for IT are falling. There are frustrations in end users. You may see frustrations in your different business units. You may have other leaders in the business asking your CIO for things that frankly, your team's not able to deliver because you don't have the tools, you don't have the time to focus, or there's just too much overhead. You're bogged down in managing the tools and you can't get to delivering the outcomes. And when we put all that together, the cost to solve this challenge is rising. And then you got to pepper in the daily evolving threats that we're facing with breach prevention or threat protection at the endpoint. And what we're seeing is systems management teams and config managers are stretched to the breaking point. And when we look at this through our lens, we believe we're here to help you balance the need to drive end user productivity while also keeping those people safe. And that balance was already hard, but with the introduction of Windows 10, that challenge has been amplified. And I look at that in terms of patch compliance. There is an enormous amount of pressure around that. We're going to talk about that today. Old OSs being out of support sooner than we think is a huge issue that we're going to talk about. And then how Windows 10 adoption is being forced through hardware refresh. We've seen a lot of this out there in our customer environments, and we want to make sure we arm you with the latest information as you negotiate with your OEMs, with your vendors, and help you understand some of the external pressures that you're going to be facing if you're not already. So I've done a little bit of theory here, and now I'd like to introduce somebody that can kind of help you understand this. We've got Kerry Bedeau from the Albemarle Corporation who's joined us today, and he's going to talk a little bit about the challenges he's facing. So Kerry, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hey guys. Thanks for the intro, Troy. Just, I guess I'll talk briefly about what my role here is at Albemarle, and then let Troy proceed on and chime in occasionally just to say, hey, this lines up with what we're seeing or doesn't. So I work for Albemarle's corporate IT office. We have local sites across the world that consume our IT services. I happen to work on the IT infrastructure team, and a subset of that team is endpoint management services. And my team is responsible for Windows image management, software deployments, just bringing consistency to I guess the consumption habits of our local site IT teams across the world. We dip into the security side a little bit through endpoint management by issuing Microsoft updates, any third-party updates that are generally pretty popular, as well as a little bit of encryption. So that's kind of a brief overview of what my team provides to our environment. Troy, anything else you'd like to add there for me, or you want to move on to the next?
Well, generally, I think you're a pretty good person, and I like you. But beyond that, Kerry, let's talk about a few of these challenges, and I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of how you folks are addressing them. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool. So, many organizations that we talk to are either behind or just have not begun their Windows 10 migration. And a lot of that really comes down to they're relying on some safe havens that we believed were there. But we're all quickly finding out they're not there, and that's what we're going to try and help the audience understand today. If you think once you deploy a version of Windows 10 you're done, I want to tell you that's incorrect thinking, and you're going to be caught flat-footed in that scenario. Let's just briefly examine the facts here. So Windows 10 became generally available in 2015, and technically it doesn't reach end of support until October 14th, 2025. So everything so far seems pretty normal, right? A 10-year life cycle for an OS. But here's the thing, it's not normal. You have to keep updating all of your PCs to one of the two releases, latest releases of the current branch for business in order to have support from Microsoft. So in reality, this only gives you about a 12-month OS life cycle for now. And that's a lot shorter than the 10 years we got with Windows 7. So let's take a look at how that's going to happen. Currently, there are 3 current branch for business releases in the market, and that's really what Microsoft describes as what they expect in your production environment, right? So following on the version 15.07 release in the summer of 2015, we saw the 15.11 release in fall of 2015, which was just simply called the November update. In summer 2016, we got the anniversary update, which is version 16.07. And so here's the big deal. In May of 2017, so just a few months from now, the first release of Windows 7, which is version 15.07, will reach end of support. And that's going to happen as version 17.03, which you may know as the Creators Update, arrives in the next couple of weeks. This is a big thing to get over for a lot of organizations, because you may have just begun your Windows 10 migration or not begun it at all, and already the first release of that operating system is going out of support. This was preceded by an announcement in January by Microsoft that the new media for 16.07 is available in your volume licensing servicing center, and that's what starts the grace period counter. Now, per some previously announced blogs and other articles by Microsoft, they said there would be 60 days. They actually stretched this out a little bit into May. There's no specific date in May. And really what I'd ask you to take away from that is, I don't think they're really sure how this is going to work. They're experimenting a little bit to see what their customers are going to tolerate. But I would not expect this pace to slow down. So I think the lesson there, and what I think you should take away, is be proactive. Make sure you are at N-1. You're on the current release, at the very most, the most previous release. But you don't want to fall 2 or more behind, because you're not going to be supported. So I think we'll get more clarity around this when the Creators Update ships in April. We don't have a specific date yet, but I would bet all of my money on April 11th, which would be the next Patch Tuesday. We'll find out if I was right in a couple of weeks. One of the other questions I get frequently is, well, why do you know this, and how do you keep up with all of this? The answer is you got to read Microsoft's blogs. There are a few TechNet articles out there. If you've never seen docs.microsoft.com, that's their new facility for sharing information that's fairly up to date. But unless you're reading their blogs where they're announcing these things, and that's changing over time, you're not going to be able to keep up. So just one note here for housekeeping. After the webinar, I'm going to send some things out. One of the things I'll be sending all attendees and registrants will be all of my source URLs, so you can bookmark those blogs and keep up to date just like me. So let's talk about another safe haven. Many organizations thought, well, we'll just stay on Windows 7 or 8.1 for a while, right? We can keep buying those. I'm sorry, but the answer to that is no. Our October surprise last year was that OEMs were given a stop sale order on Windows 7 and 8.1, so they can no longer sell PCs with those operating systems. You must buy new PCs with Windows 10. Carrie, what do you think about that?
So, yeah, before I started seriously considering Windows 10 or even looking at it, you know, I guess I made the assumptions that there would be some of these safe havens that we'd be okay. We didn't have to start immediately, you know, preparing Windows 10.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of feel like our team does a pretty good job of staying on top of things. We've got a pretty solid Windows 7 deployment process. So it wasn't until I really went out of my way to have some information presented to me about Windows 10 and the coming changes that I really understood it or really got it and started to realize that any of the safe haven avenues that I would look down, they just really were non-existent. So, you know, we didn't really have like a panic moment, but we said, okay, we've got to kick this into high gear and start preparing. You know, everything that I've seen here so far, you know, I can attest to as well. One thing that I think about how my company is sort of well positioned for a transition to Windows 10 is that we've already been through like a 64-bit migration. We've already, you know, we're offering Windows 7 64-bit as our standard image. So we feel like we've already been through some you know, pain points or any growth necessary with regards to like our application portfolio. So I think that was a big step in the right direction. Another reason I feel like we're sort of well positioned for this type of transition is we've established well-defined alpha, beta, and production groups. So anytime we release updates or anything within our environment, we always start off with like an internal global IT alpha group. So that's kind of the first group that gets all the changes. They get to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down or have a chance to offer feedback. Everything looks good there. We progress on to the beta group, which is just a larger number of users across the globe that you know, function across various aspects of the business or even operations and plant sites. So I feel like we're well positioned in that way with regards to you know, the upcoming releases of Current Branch and Current Branch for Business and the different user rings. I really kind of see that alpha and beta group transitioning into our different ring groups as far as the people that in the future will either consume Current Branch and Current Branch for Business. We're just really going to have to do a good job of promoting that those users are going to be in a much more dynamic environment with regards to the operating system than perhaps they're used to. And quite honestly, that may cause some of our beta users to have to shed off out of the beta group and just become more of a production user. But that's a little work we have to do on our side.
Yeah, so, you know, Carrie, you're talking about a methodology I promote, right, which is simplification and streamlining, getting to a single architecture, so you only have to manage one imaging and provisioning process, simplifying your application catalog. You talked a little bit about patching, and that's a great setup for me to the next safe haven I wanted to talk about. You know, beyond not being able to buy Windows 7 or 8.1 and sort of being forced to buy Windows 10 with new hardware, another safe haven we saw customers kind of retreat to would be, well, I'll just keep operating Windows 7 and 8 because I don't want to adapt to this new Windows 10 cumulative update model. Well, at the same time the stop sale came in October, on October 31st, they also, or excuse me, the Patch Tuesday in October, They also sort of backported that cumulative update model from Windows 10 into Windows 7 and 8.1. In my opinion, it's actually a little bit harder in those platforms because it's not as clean. In Windows 10, you have a single cumulative update. While that takes away some user choice around, I want this KB or I don't want that KB, at least it's consistent across all editions and architectures and versions of Windows 10. With Windows 7 and 8.1, you've got the monthly roll-up, you've got the security-only update, you've got the .NET Framework monthly roll-up. I mean, I'm stopping to take a breath here just thinking about trying to manage all of that for these platforms, which are the majority of which are still deployed out there. I love that in the blog where they announced this, I think they titled it Further Simplifying the Model. I wonder if that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, Carrie, how did you guys respond to that? And can you talk about maybe the impact of that model on your current population of Windows 7 or 8.1?
Yeah, Troy, to be honest, I feel like the Windows 7 cumulative patching has not been as big a deal to our organization. I don't know if that means that we're doing something different than others or quite what that means. But I felt like Windows 7 patching in general, true, it's not doing it's not really offering us the ability to weed out any KBs that we might catch, but because we've got our alpha and beta releases that we do, while we do review the KBs, we don't put a lot of stock into some of the issues that are identified until we see them in our environment. So honestly, Windows 7 patch management with the cumulative updates has kind of been business as usual. I realize we're only like, I think it's 3 or 4 months into that. But I haven't felt the pain for Windows 7 with the cumulative update patches.
Okay.
Now, as I understand it, with Windows 10, the branch releases will be the full feature set updates. So not only will you be getting security updates through your patching, you also be getting the feature sets through the branch releases. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a model change, and it sounds like, you know, you guys have adapted, so you're well prepared at least for accepting the methodology, right? That you're going to do a monthly cumulative or quality roll-up. It is true in Windows 10 that that cumulative update contains both security updates, which I think most folks commonly refer to as critical updates, and features, not necessarily fixes. Those could still come out of band. But everything is kind of lumped together, right? And at first glance, that seems a little risky because I think we're all accustomed to maybe doing a little bit more iterative testing on individual KBs. Some folks kind of went the bulletin model, where if it's in a bulletin, we're just going to push it out there and maybe not hope for the best, but assume that for the most part we'll be successful and we'll deal with the exceptions from there. But I think, you know, the takeaway I would have from this is, we're all moving this way with Windows 10 anyways, so gaining this competency and having success in Windows 7 is a great way to prepare for that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about something you briefly mentioned here. So in Windows 10 world, we're going to have a monthly cumulative update, and then every 4 to 6 months, and this is not necessarily true today, but we're trending that way, we're going to get what's called a feature update. And what's interesting about feature updates is they're not just service packs, they are new versions of the operating system. So if you go back to that diagram that I showed with the different versions, right, 1507, 1511, 1607, 1703, that hasn't been every 6 months. It's been close to it, but that is a new version of the operating system. And if you're still unsure that Windows is now Windows as a service, this should be blowing your mind. These feature updates are moving towards about every 4 months over time. Microsoft has been very upfront that they expect to ship a feature update 2 to 3 times per year. Right now, we're just about starting to hit 2 times a year, so expect that to accelerate. And one thing I would ask is, you know, don't we think this is eventually going to align to the monthly update cadence for every other Microsoft platform? Azure, Intune, Configuration Manager, and Office 365, they're all on a monthly iteration. And this is just further evidence of Microsoft's agile approach. And I think it's It's going to impact every enterprise at some level because we all use some or all of these solutions. So Carrie, I'm going to tee you up here in a second, but let's just talk about, you know, what's a safe haven? Well, deferring the feature update could be a safe haven, but I'm going to say no, it isn't. And here's why. We know now that only 2 versions of Windows 10 are supported at any one time. We know as of right now that's about a 12-month life cycle. We also know, based on some recent updates that I'm going to talk about in a minute, that they can turn off security updates for old versions of Windows, which is just starting to happen. So we don't think that deferring is a safe haven. We prefer people to take the approach that you talked about, which is accept the new methodology in Windows 7, build your competency on it, continue to deliver the outcomes to your organization, and then when you make that shift to Windows 10, it won't be such a stark contrast, right? So, you know, Carrie, what do you think? How are you guys responding to that, and what's your strategy around deferring updates?
Yeah, so from what I've learned as far as, you know, being able to operate on a supported OS, I don't intend to defer the upgrades. But what this sort of screams to me is I think our experience of reimaging PCs is going to be different than what we've done historically, where, you know, typically you bring a PC back to the workbench or your setup table, and, you know, maybe the user's without their PC or you've given them a loaner in the meantime. I see this kind of, you know, just more along the lines of kind of what we see with, say, our iPhones and the iOS. Just really much more of that cadence, but just, I guess, a slower pace, at least initially with Microsoft. You know, if they plan to release a feature set every 6 months, to me, that means that a user's PC, in order to be supported, or at least their OS to be supported, that means once a year their machine is going to have to receive a feature update. And we still got some work to do on our side to figure out how we're going to present that to the users, whether that's going to be the traditional, hey, let us take your PC for a little while and load this image, or is it going to be something that we make consumable to the user as like a zero-touch installation, where, you know, some message goes out to them that says, hey, you've got 1 month to accept or to trigger this feature update. So it's kind of the initial thoughts that I've had on that.
Yeah, so if I can, I'm going to press you a little bit on your thinking, because you said something that I think is important. You know, we've come a long way in IT from the days of centralized iron-fisted control, approaching that line of trying to give people what they want when they want without necessarily exposing the organization to risk or spending more money than we can. And the way you described it, it sounds to me like you've examined the evidence you have, you've looked at the methodology, and you generally accept it, and then you put yourself in the end user's shoe, and you're saying, I'm going to make the decision on how to manage this, whether that's staying current, N-1, N-2, but you're starting from the end user perspective of how is this going to impact me and what is IT asking me to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. See how I could elaborate it more on it. Just you know, always we want to be as least disruptive to the end user as possible. I guess what we're envisioning is, you know, they would potentially see their operating system or their feature set upgrade presented to them through an app store, perhaps. Mm-hmm. That way they can do it on their schedule, on their time. They can trigger it when they want. But of course, we'll have to, it's kind of a balance. You can have it when you want, but within this time frame.
Yep. Yeah, well, I believe in the same thing, right? It's a balance. How do I keep you productive while I keep you protected? And how do we do that without disrupting your role in the business too much, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple more things here. One thing I've heard in a lot of conversations is, well, I don't like any of this, so I'm just going to deploy LTSB. And if you're not familiar with it, long-term servicing branch is essentially a version of Windows 10 It's very similar to the legacy model, right? You deploy it, you service it over a number of years. Updates come slower. You don't get new features, and it's a way to operate in a steady state. Microsoft has been very clear that you should not do this. I've had a few customers insist on doing it this way because they see it as a safe haven and they don't want to have to operate in this new model. But we're learning more and more as we go forward why this isn't a good idea. Now, besides not having certain features like a modern browser, right? Edge, and I don't know if anybody uses it. I use Edge, but maybe I'm unique. We know now that LTSB will only support, quote, the current generation silicon that's released when it ships. And right now, we also know that there's not going to be updates for new hardware on LTSB until 2019. So if you were thinking about deploying LTSB in your organization and you're going to keep buying PCs, that dog does not hunt. You can't do it this way. We also know you're going to miss a lot of user experience and functionality features. And really my message here, it's going to be painful, and Microsoft's not going to back off on this. They need to push to this methodology. We need to normalize the Windows implementations across the world. The only way we can operate in this agile methodology is if they're mostly the same. And so LTSB really needs to be what it was truly designed for, special purpose devices, right? So, you know, Carrie, in your environment, you may have certain, I don't know, industrial control machines, sensors, IoT type stuff, something on a factory floor or on a cart somewhere. Are you guys planning to deploy LTSB in some cases? Can you talk about, if so, like how did you designate what systems?
Yeah, so before I started learning about the various branches and what they all meant, you know, this was my big assumption. We're okay because I know that there's something similar to, you know, what was later termed the long-term service branch. That was going to be like our safe haven. Like, we'll just keep doing things the same way we've been doing it. But of course, I've since learned, you know, why that's not a good idea. So we do have various use cases across our fleet. We do a good job of having a single golden image that all of our PCs at least initiate from. You know, we'll have PCs on our business network, industrial control system PCs, you know, various functions out within the plants and things like that. So I could see offering the LTSB for some of those special case PCs, like, you know, maybe the current branch and current branch for business. You know, obvious use case for the business network and those typical office PCs. But, you know, I'm sure there's going to be some exceptions we have to make within the plant side of things and operations. And so LTSB is something we'll consider for those, but it's not the safe haven that I was hoping it to be.
Yeah, so, you know, sound strategy, you know, we're happy to hear that. I'm sure Microsoft would be. Something that I think may be useful for the audience that we learned by doing, LTSB is actually a separate installation media. So all other versions of Windows 10, whether that's Enterprise or Pro or whatever, you can deploy from the same whim. You can cross-grade, right? You can upgrade from Pro to Enterprise. LTSB, you cannot. You cannot upgrade, you can't downgrade, you can't cross-grade, and you have to use a separate whim or installer. So that means if you do deploy LTSB to a system and you decide later to go to, let's say, Enterprise, you know, current branch for business, that is a wipe and reload scenario. There's no in-place upgrade. There's no migration scenario. You must wipe and reload that system from scratch. So that's something to think about before you deploy it.
Troy, the long-term service branch, I think whenever I first looked into it, it had a support life of 5 years. Is that still the case, or was that ever the case?
Yeah, that is correct. So it had a stated 5 year of mainstream support and then an additional 5 years of extended support. So LTSB will have that full 10-year life cycle, but with all the caveats that we discussed, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so one more safe haven I want to touch on here, and I'm going to try not to get destroyed by a robot from the future for saying this, but what I'm seeing in the marketplace right now is our vendors have combined to use CPU detection as a weapon against us. And this is really important right now. Back in 2015, 2016, the vendors cooked up a scheme to disable software updates on what they called the current generation silicon that was also not running, quote, the current version of Windows. So this meant if you had an older chipset or processor generation and you deployed a new OS, you were okay. But if you tried to deploy that new OS to an old chipset that maybe they didn't want you to keep or run that OS on, they could disable updates. And then, of course, conversely, if you had a new chipset, and this is what they really wanted to stop, they didn't want you deploying an old version of Windows to that. And so there were some attempts to make this really painful. They kind of backed off, pushed it to 2017, then they pushed it back out to 2018, and finally they relented and they decided to establish end of support for Windows 7 through 2020 and Windows 8.1 for 2023. However, what happened at that time, and I'm really talking about the Skylake generation from Intel, they kind of backed off on that, but now what we're seeing is if you deploy Windows 7 or 8.1 to the current generation, which is Kaby Lake, or the 7th generation from AMD, you cannot get updates. In fact, we just saw a support article emerge last week where your end users are getting messages in Windows 10 saying that their processors, or excuse me, Windows 7 or 8.1, that their processor's not supported. So that's really a way for the OEM, the chipset maker, and the operating system vendor to kind of combine to force you to upgrade to Windows 10. Because if you decide, well, I know that it only supports Windows 10, but I'm going to deploy Windows 7 to this new Kaby Lake-based device, well, they just turned off updates for those. And they did exactly what they said they were going to do, which is we're not going to allow you to run these old operating systems on those devices. So again, we'll distribute the source URL, so you'll see an article from PC World that I think describes it really well as the Microsoft support article. So Carrie, can you talk a little bit about how you guys are managing your device stock, how you're choosing what generation to buy, and how you're kind of managing this all?
Yeah, or kind of how we're dealing or just coping with it, huh?
Yeah, that may be a better term. Yeah.
This is kind of like the final slap in the face was that, the models that we currently offer as our standards are Skylake. So recognizing just through talking to our procurement vendors, recognizing that the global stock of Skylake processors are eventually going to run out probably, if not in July, at least by August. And, of course, they can give you no guarantees that some large company is going to come in and buy up the remaining stock of all of those just so that they can stay on Windows 7. So we're starting to prepare each of our local sites. If we've got an annual refresh project devoted to replacing our oldest PCs, we've said, hey, if you want to be sure that you don't have anything unexpected, you might want to go ahead and order those sooner than later. If you haven't ordered them I'm starting to tell them that they haven't ordered it by the end of Q2, then they probably won't have it. So we're prepping our users for we're prepping our site IT teams in that way, telling them if you're going to purchase equipment, go ahead and purchase it now. Otherwise, you're going to be reliant on my team's ability to deliver Windows 10 in pretty short order.
Yeah, and just kind of coming full circle here, Carrie, when I think about having to buy a bunch of stock of older generation hardware, that might increase costs, right? Because you're making a capital expenditure that maybe wasn't planned for, or we would prefer not to make. And that may affect NPS because end users may be expecting or demanding features on those newer generation hardwares, right? Portable devices, convertibles, devices with touchscreens. Those are all things that we think productive end users want. So that's an issue that I think while we had hints of it, it's really come to the forefront with the essentially blocking of updates on Windows 7 on those new devices. So I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but we kind of got to figure it out quickly, right?
Right.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just kind of quickly talk a little bit more about the trends that we're seeing, and we'll kind of wrap up here and all get on with our day. You know, we're seeing that IT teams are bogged down at a time when they're more critical than ever, right? You have so many things you need to do with your workload. Many organizations, frankly, make the mistake of thinking that adding more tools or people are going to solve this problem, right? And we've talked about how Windows 10 is going to amplify some of these issues. I think it's worth saying that systems administration or config management really is a critical workload. We don't get as much attention today, like in contrast to things around threat protection or compliance. But the ground truth is, if you can't touch it, you can't secure it. And that's why what we do as systems admins or systems management folks is so important to our organization. And then wrapping that around all of this disruption and external pressure from Windows 10, while a lot of great things are tied to that, it's really putting a crunch on us right now. So what I'd like to do now is just introduce a colleague of mine who's going to tell you a little bit about what he sees happening out there in the face of these challenges. So please welcome Bob Rabbit. Bob runs the managed services organization here at ITS. Bob, you want to say hi?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. So as Troy mentioned, I'm Bob Rabbit. I run our managed services organization, very similar to Troy. I have about 16 years in the IT industry. Again, most of that focus in the systems management world. So really feel the pain with a lot of folks. And so why this is important, why I wanted to take a few minutes out of the webinar day to talk, is to have a discussion that related to not just how do we go manage Windows 10, but just thinking about systems management overall, right? There's a very significant change in how systems and operating systems are being managed in the future, right? And so as we look at these times of change, that's going to force organizations to think about how do we manage this moving forward. And so there's a kind of a traditional model, as we talked about before, the traditional model of managing operating systems, right, where you set it on there and you lay the OS down, you do some updates, and you let it run for as long as it can possibly run. In a similar vein, there's a kind of a typical methodology for implementing a new operating system or a new solution within your environment that we see. And Windows 10 is a good trigger to once again reevaluate that traditional cycle. So what I'm getting at here is you look at the slide deck, is what we see organizations doing is, okay, we've got a new thing that we need to introduce into our environment, in this particular case Windows 10. So what do? Let's get some help out here, right? Let's identify maybe a good partner that really understands Windows 10, understands how to manage it moving forward, and get our team up to speed. Let's implement a new tool within the environment to go manage this thing, right? And then what inevitably happens, and we see this, having been in consulting for so long, we see this over and over and over again. We as an ITS, as an organization, come back and continue to work with our partners, and 6 months, 12 months down the road, what have you, we come back out and we have a conversation. How are things going, right? How, in terms of your ability to manage, say Windows 10 or Windows 7 or whatever, how's that going? Well, our strategy has changed a little bit, or the people that we worked with before have left the organization. And what ends up happening is we see this downward spiral from the initial desired outcome is no longer being reached, right? Things have changed, resources have shifted, and you're no longer necessarily able to manage whatever that system is the way that you have traditionally done. So you ask a partner to come back in. Hey, come help us again. Cool, we do that, and we get you back up to where you need to be.
Yeah, so Bob, you're talking about one possible path forward,
Correct.
right? Which is to continue to repeat the cycle. Which let's be honest here. We have a business built around that. It's good for us, and it's good for our customers and our partners, right? Because we go through these typical cycles, and you've seen it with every generation or era change in IT, right? We do the same thing we did 10 years ago,
yep,
but in a different way with different tools. But what we've begun to see, and I think this is what you wanted to talk about, is the reasons why we struggle or teams get bogged down, they really don't change over time, right?
No, they don't. And so these are kind of the fundamental principles and why Troy and I are talking today. One of the big reasons is there's reasons that these projects or these initiatives fail over time, and we've seen that over and over and over again. And again, I won't go through these exhaustively, but just understand that cycle is well known. And this is the time, again, as we look at a very significant change, not just in an operating system, but a management methodology that goes along with that, to identify, do we want to continue to manage things in the way we have before, right? So by addressing those particular outcomes, either through utilizing us from a project perspective or another competent partner, you can also look at new or different ways to manage those systems in a way where you're consistently meeting and then exceeding the outcomes that you're looking for. And that can engender in a couple different ways, whether that's ongoing management by a partner, or maybe new models of deployment where maybe not all of the ongoing systems management infrastructure is in-house anymore, right? Mm-hmm. That getting that workload up and out of your environment, it's still important. You still need to be utilizing it, but it doesn't necessarily need to live in your environment. So.
Yeah, people used to change the oil in their cars themselves when it was fairly simple, right? You needed a wrench, you knew where a carburetor was. Now there are probably 6 different defense systems in a current generation car that you have to defeat and get the special wrench in order to take the oil filter off. And so exactly. in most places in the world, it makes sense to take your car to an oil change provider, and you get that consistent outcome of your engine not blowing up, right?
Exactly.
Kind of an interesting analogy. So thanks for sitting through the sales pitch, everyone, which obviously we have to do. If you stuck with us through that, I'm going to give you a little bit more insight that we believe we possess as a partner to these OEMs and vendors, as well as to our customers. So we kind of sit at the intersection of all these relationships, and it gives us a unique perspective, right? So I think it's fairly simple. Windows 10 is critical. It must succeed. It will succeed. I deployed Windows Vista at some point. I didn't really want to, but I had to. Windows 7 has seen a great deal of success in the enterprise. Windows 8 and 8.1 really didn't catch on, and so we're all ready to make this transition. We need to evolve our tools, we need to evolve our methodologies, we need to adapt to what's going on, all these external pressures, but we need to understand why it's going to happen. Microsoft is very focused on driving Office 365 adoption. They're very focused on getting you to use the advanced security features of Windows 10, like Secure Boot. This goes along with trying to get all your devices from BIOS to UEFI, right? There's a number of pressures we need to respond to that are kind of wrapped up in that. And honestly, Microsoft needs every Windows 10 PC in the world to be as similar as possible to help minimize their resources needed to be spent on development and support of those devices. So productivity, security, consistency, that's going to be their focus. I just can't help but keep reiterating, this train is not slowing down. It is not stopping. You either get on board or get out of the way. The other thing that I think is really important is we're finally seeing that convergence of platforms, right? It's not about buying an MDM solution and then managing your on-premise devices with a separate tool. We're getting to the point where hybrid infrastructures are possible. With some help, you can stitch those tools together, right? The very mature on-premise tool that's losing relevance and the very immature cloud-based tool that's more progressive, stitch those together. For this period of time, you can kind of solve the problem. I think Microsoft's going to support this with their technology stack, right? We see that integration across their MDM solution, the Office productivity tools, Azure, and what they're doing with System Center. But what we have found, and we believe there's evidence to support this, is most organizations intend to not only begin their migration to Windows 10 this year, but in conjunction with that project, because Windows 10 is consistent across all form factors, they will finally converge and consolidate those management tools. So what can we help you do around that, right? Like any vendor or consultancy, we have to provide you a little bit of a plug, but I'm going to tease you here with something I think is interesting and you're going to want to see. Please leverage our thought leadership to work through these complex set of issues. As you heard from Carrie earlier, there aren't clear answers for everything. We're getting more clarity by the day. But it's a journey that we're all on together. And fortunately, ITS is in a position to be able to focus on these issues and I'm in a position in my role to focus on them exclusively around systems management. So we tend to have information earlier and with good vetting, and we like to share that with everyone. If you've gotten some value out of our talk today, please know that we can help, whether it's a workshop, an assessment, design engagement, or a fully managed outcome service. There are many ways for us to help you get where you need to be with Windows 10. So with that, thanks. Have a great day. My thanks to Carrie from Albemarle and Bob from ITS for joining me. We'll follow up soon with that Q&A, sources, and insights to your inbox. Thanks.